It's 3 a.m. You're scared awake from a deep sleep by the yells of strangers who are grabbing you from your warm bed. You feel the bite of cold steel on your wrists as your hands are cuffed behind your back. You yell for your mother and father, but then you notice they're standing in the doorway, watching the scene unfold as impassive bystanders. Tears sting your eyes as your blood runs cold from fear and confusion. Before you know it, you're in the backseat of a vehicle headed into the darkness. I'm Marina. With me, I have my best friend Laura, and this is a bonus Grimm.
Well, that made me sad. But that's also because I know generally what this case is about, and then it made me sad. I don't know. I just was imagining laying there and wondering why my parents weren't helping me.
I know. I don't like it.
No.
That's why we're talking about it.
Yeah, fair.
That's why it belongs on Grimm.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. So I decided today that I wanted to talk about the troubled teen industry. I had to cover this because it's been coming up in our Discord. It's come up in one of our cases in the past, and I mentioned doing a P-Bony on it. And then the program came out on Netflix, and that's sort of what just brought all this on.
Yep. I like how all of us, including our gremlins, were immediately watched that. It was like, yes, we are all the same people.
Yes. So if you haven't seen the program on Netflix, that discusses an institution called the Academy at Ivy Ridge. Today, I focus a lot on what was called the Elan School, but there's just a lot of overlap in the principles employed in these programs in schools. So it's also like a general discussion of what goes on at these places. I mentioned in episode 41 that Michael Skakel, if you remember him, the murder of Martha Moxley, he was a teenager who was struggling with substance abuse issues. He was able to avoid jail time by going to the Elan School in Poland, Maine. So I read various online articles about the Elan School as well as Reddit threads, which comes back up later. I also watched the documentary The Last Stop, which was unbelievable. And if you liked the program, you'll definitely like that documentary. I think it was on Prime Video.
Okay, perfect.
And then I was only planning on giving a general overview of like some of the treatment programs, but then I got sucked into the psychology and the movement and the history of what created programs like Elan and the Academy at Ivy Ridge. So you're going to get some of that history as well.
Ooh, and I have to give a shout out to Marina for doing this month's P-Bony because it was supposed to be me, but I forgot because our schedule's been off. We've had like a lot of personal events and all that, and then you can probably hear in my voice I'm still sick, just endlessly.
And stomach bugs.
Yep, it's just that one wasn't me though. That wasn't my fault.
I know.
But it just our schedule's been off, and then about 1:30 last night when I was up with the baby, and I thought, who's supposed to be recording and whose case are we going through? It's MMS. Marina saves me. So I just need to give you a shout out because she pulled an audible and was like, no, I'm ready. I can do it.
And guys,
so thank you.
In the eternal words of Smash Mouth, the days keep coming and they don't stop coming.
We have said that a lot of times.
After every P-Bony, we're like, we're going to do this one early. And the narrator's like, but they didn't do it early.
And that's why we have the best producer because he just rolls with it and helps us
sure
out.
Does. We're like, if you could turn this around in 6 hours, that'd be great. Anyways, okay, so I don't think that anybody will care, and you never do, and I always say something, but in organizing this, I just wanted you to have all of the information all at once when I was talking about every single piece of it, which really isn't how stories or information work.
Yes, but that's actually what I want also.
I know. So I was like, this for, no, that for, but I wanted, so I just, it's all in here. And we'll just talk about it.
And you know, if it's not in there, it's in your brain and it will actually make it into the podcast anyway.
That's also true. Okay, let's begin.
Let's start.
Programs like Elan were really birthed from the concept of therapeutic communities, and it came from this original program called Cyanon. It was a drug rehabilitation program that ended up basically becoming a religious cult.
Nothing to do with Scientology. It just made me think of that.
Nope.
Okay.
It was founded in 1958 by a man named Charles Dietrich, who was a recovering alcoholic who felt that AA was not tough enough for people. He wanted to create a haven for addicts where they were forced to undergo undergo the 12 steps. Like he felt they were just too soft on recovering addicts. Sign-on included group therapy sessions that they called the game. And these are also known in the real world as attack therapy.
On a far less serious note, did anyone play the game in high school because you just lost? I know that the Gremlins will back me up here. You clearly didn't play it. The entire point of the game is to not think about the game. That's it. So we would go weeks or months, and then someone would just say the game, and you lost. So we just all lost. You're welcome.
How often does the game come up?
I don't know.
Like, is it like in talking about football or
nothing? It's just that's it. It's just it. I'm not used to having this thing here, and I keep hitting it.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry.
Stop it.
I'm pseudo-Italian.
No, I never played the game.
Clearly.
Well, I lost the game.
Yeah,
sorry.
We're losing.
Anyways.
Yeah, back to your vicious attacks.
The game, also known as attack therapy.
Yes.
This involved yelling and screaming at group members to try to break down their defenses. He felt that only then could you find the person's innermost troubles and begin to work towards their sobriety. The idea was that you needed to break down someone in order to build them back up as a better person.
I clearly don't agree with all of the things we're going to go through today, but I think the intent is nice.
It's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
I actually think some of the things that we're going to talk about would and did work on some people.
Yeah.
It just depends on your personality.
I think it's almost the concept, I guess if you really extrapolate it, it's the concept of rock bottom. Like you're creating this really awful rock bottom.
Right.
Maybe.
And probably also giving them PTSD in the process.
I mean,
Yeah. Sign-On was considered to be a huge success right from the start.
Really?
Mm-hmm. But it didn't take long for these principles to go too far. Mm-hmm. And they came with accusations of abuse. And then the movement began to take on a cult vibe. I mean, like head shaving, like lots of crazy stuff. Sign-On was ultimately closed in 1991 after a lengthy legal battle with the IRS. The only thing in life that's certain is death and taxes. Am I right?
Say it. Yep.
It also made me think of, what was it, Lori Vallow's parents, right?
Your memory's a lot better than mine.
I'm pretty sure it was her, where like her parents were like, we're not paying taxes. And the IRS was like, but you have to. I think it was them. Both during and after the closure of Sign-On, the principles employed at that facility were adopted by other therapeutic programs, seeing that program's success, including Elan 1, which was founded by Joseph Ritchie and Dr. Gerald Davidson, who is a psychiatrist. Joseph Ritchie was a former delinquent and heroin addict, and he had gone through a program called Daytop, which was very similar to Sign-On, and then became a staff member himself. So he just really embraced this.
Good and bad, because I think I'm thinking you're going to get into some of this, but we've seen in experiments where when the not the captor, but like the prisoner becomes the guard kind of thing, that it's actually worse.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I will wait until you...
Psychology.
I love it.
Elan 1 was founded in 1970 as a drug rehabilitation program for those 18 and older. It didn't start off as an incredibly lucrative prospect. It wasn't until after the original Elan 1 burned down in 1974 and they opened up the Poland Springs campus that it began to generate money. Joseph Ritchie and Dr. Davidson decided that they could help more people than just recovering addicts, so they opened up the program to people including teenagers exhibiting oppositional or criminal behavior. That's when the money started rolling in.
Of course, the parents.
It was said that the diagnostic test for entry into the program was a wallet biopsy. If parents could afford the school, then the students' troubles were bad enough to warrant the program. Back in 1978, when Michael Skakel attended the school, tuition was $42,000 a year.
Whoa. And was it, well, okay, we know they didn't actually get regular education, but was it supposed to be that? Or was it like a pause?
It was supposed to be, so it was touted as a private co-educational boarding and general academic school for adolescents with emotional, behavioral, or adjustment problems for grades 8 through 12.
Say that 10 times fast.
So they were trying to say that it's, like a boarding institution and there's academics and therapy involved. The Elan School was designed to be the last stop for teens that had failed out of other programs, teens with substance abuse issues, criminal tendencies, runaways, and oppositional behavior.
It's like they said on the program, like, as a parent, if you couldn't figure out how to save your kid, I can 1,000% see why this would seem appealing if you obviously didn't know all the bad things that
Right.
you were just like, I don't know what to do with my kid. Maybe this will help.
Right.
It's just so sad.
And it's almost one of those things, like, this is so bad to say, but you're like, it's this much money. They must be employing the best tactics and the best programs and have, the best psychotherapists involved. Like, if I'm going to pay the cost of college tuition, I would expect the best of the best coming out of this program.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see why they called it the program.
How many times have we said program?
A lot. Many of the students came from homes with absent parents, substance abuse, and physical and sexual abuse as well. The reasons that stem these issues and behaviors. Rather than rehabilitate, the program was essentially designed to break the students. Unless the students went to the school willingly, which I'm assuming was relatively rare given the type of school that it was, teens were essentially kidnapped in the middle of the night, as I described in the opener. Students were woken up, handcuffed, thrown into the back of a van, and driven to the woods of Poland, Maine. Upon admission, students were stripped of their personal belongings, including their clothes, and were forced to shower without privacy, and they were deloused.
Oh, geez.
Starting the pattern of humiliation inherent in the program. And somebody also said it basically is meant to make them feel like dirty. Like we don't want you to infect our campus, so we need to delouse you. And I think the most insane aspect of these programs, including the Elan School, is that parents typically sign an agreement that communication will be limited and is completely dictated by the school. A lot of these parents are drawn into these places to avoid mental illness and addiction diagnoses and medication, and they'd rather have their kids viewed as bad kids than sick kids.
Interesting.
And I'm guessing most parents were completely in the dark as to what was really going on.
For sure. Yeah.
Students weren't allowed to write or receive letters until they earned the right to do so, which could take 8 months or more. Unopened letters from friends would sometimes be ripped up in front of the students to try to motivate them to move up and succeed in the program. And all the letters were monitored, and any letters that tried to paint an accurate picture of what was going on and how students were treated were marked as manipulative and would not be sent out until they were rewritten, just like at the Academy at Ivy Ridge.
I was thinking a lot of this is so it's all these,
that's why like they're all I think there's an overarching theme to all of these. But
is it like when Cameron Hooker had his magazine with the rules on how to break a person? Did they have their own rules? Because I think they actually did, because they had psychiatrists.
Yeah, but that's like sort of the same thing. Remember, it was like take them, surprise them and take them, isolate them, cut off communication.
Weird reward system, occasionally let them have freedom.
Yes,
like
exactly.
It's like there's a lot of similar.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff involved in that.
And on top of all of that, I know you've talked a lot before about that kids are still developing. I mean, even teens are still developing. That I wouldn't want this to happen to anyone, no adults or anything. But
right.
To do this to teens and kids that are I think it affects them so much worse.
And they're
so much more.
They're more subject to influence. And I don't mean to change them for the better. I mean, they are just subject to the influence of what was happening in these facilities.
Oh, gosh.
In addition to the letters, all phone calls with parents were monitored, and students were allowed only about 15 minutes a week to talk to their parents. And these phone calls were monitored as well for that manipulation, where if they tried to tell them what was going on, and there would be a student there monitoring it with their hand hovering over the hang up button, just in case they said something.
Oh my God. So it wasn't just like they could get it out and then be punished for it. Like they couldn't even communicate it.
No, because they would hang up on them.
Yikes.
Elan School had a therapeutic side and a labor side. I'm going to start with the labor side, but I feel like some of the other principles will come. This is where I just couldn't decide how I wanted to present it first. So I'm going to start with this one. So Elan was divided into houses, and each house functioned with the collective work of 5 houses. There was, it's like a tree, but I'll explain it.
Okay.
So there's multiple houses, and within each house, there's 5 houses. There was a service crew that did janitorial work, the kitchen crew that handled the food, business office that filed the paperwork, communications office that brought in news from the outside world, and the expediters who enforce security. This is like, it's like the Hunger Games or Harry Potter, where like
I did think
there's
Harry
like
Potter.
all these like made up terms, and they're just well, like, I guess the houses, they're not in Gryffindor. These are definitely in Slytherin.
Yep.
Yeah. Each office was managed by a hierarchy of positions that each resident had to work through in order to graduate the program. So each of these houses and offices had, a ladder to climb, essentially.
Preparing them for the corporate world. Yep.
Yes, for sure.
Kidding.
Students started out as quote unquote non-strength service workers. The rules were stricter for non-strengths. They could not speak to others unless they were talking to a strength or had the permission of a strength. So I would just be beaten to a pulp because I'd be like, I can't. I'm so sorry. I just can't stop talking. I can't stop talking. Above the service workers were the ramrods, which all I can think about is super troopers.
Yes. Team Ramrod.
Yeah. But the ramrods would oversee the work of the lower service workers. Once you got above them, you hit expediter, and that's when you were considered a strength and you were responsible for enforcing the rules. The expediters would watch and write down everything that students had done wrong throughout the day. Now, keep in mind, these expediters had started out as service workers and ramrods who were subject to the expediters.
Yes.
So now it's like you get to be that person enforcing the rules. And so they would monitor the phone calls and letters, and they would try to catch other students. This is another Elan School phraseology. They were trying to catch students, quote, acquiring guilt, as they called it, when students would break rules. And the more reports that expediters had against the students, basically the more they were working the system and showing their growth and their worth to the school. So they wanted to report as many students as possible so they themselves didn't get in trouble.
Of course they would.
Yeah.
Oh, my mind is going through all, like at work, we have to think about, my job is all about changing behavior. And we always talk about like, you can't just put in one, metric that you have to track because it can create these side behaviors. Like for them, they're like, we want to increase the number of reports. Well, yeah, you're getting false reports and creating this awful behavior.
Right. There were 3 cardinal rules: no sex, no drugs, no violence. But then there were just innumerable mundane rules, and any guilt from breaking these rules would be written down in the incident book, which was controlled by a shingle expediter.
If it weren't talking about the abuse of young minds, it would be a really interesting game, but it's not. No,
and
it's really awful.
It also reminds me of oh my gosh, what's the one where they have like the Luddites and oh my god, it's not Katniss.
Oh no, the Hunger Games.
No,
because I was like
the other one where she gets the tattoo on her shoulder and she gets brain tested and she's I was like, she's Divergent. That's the series, Divergent.
Yes. I did read that,
but it kind of reminds me of that too.
Oh, I want to go reread those.
Maybe that has no parallel, but that's what it made me think of. Anyways,
I can't trust what you say because
the shingle expediters, can't trust what I say. Why?
Well, because sometimes your memory is way better than mine, and then sometimes it's entirely unreliable. So I kind of just have to guess.
Listen, 70% of the time it works every time.
I'm going to move this.
Okay.
Because, hold on. Okay. Thank you.
So the things that were written down in this incident book were just anything. Goofing off, your shoelace is untied, you're not doing your chore correctly, there's too many cigarette butts somewhere, you ate too much, you ate too little, you picked up a pencil on the floor that wasn't yours and didn't report it, so you stole it, you rolled your eyes when someone was talking to you or you were being punished. And if you didn't report rule breaking, you could get in trouble for that too.
And were these known rules, or were they allowed to like make them up on the spot?
I think it was kind of both.
Oh no! But, I mean, it would be bad enough if they wrote them down, but
I think it was known rules. It's basically like anything. If you do anything, you're breaking a rule.
I would not do well.
No.
I'm bad enough following rules that I don't agree with, but ones that I don't know about, I would be very, very mad.
See, you know why I would have a problem? Because I would conform, but even conforming doesn't guarantee your success. Because,
that's what I mean. That's what I was so mad about.
Because the rules are applied inconsistently, and it's just anarchy.
Yeah,
so
I don't like it.
I would do very poorly. I'm a rule follower, and I like good things to come from me following the rules.
Yeah, I love to say that I'm a rule follower, but I mean with rules that I agree with. like the speed limit, for example. I don't happen to agree with it all the time. So,
Yeah. So
wouldn't do well.
above the expediters were department heads, also known as managers. Above that was the shingle. And then they were the one that was the head of the expediters or the head of the offices. And then you had chiefs, coordinators, full coordinators, and then re-entry staff.
This is like if you ask ChatGPT to describe, like, make up a game with houses. And it was like shingles. And you're like, nope.
You're like, no. Elan made money based on the amount of time it took for you to graduate the program, because the longer you're in, longer you pay tuition.
Of course.
So a student had to work through all of these promotions to re-entry in order to be a candidate for graduation, and each promotion took a minimum of 3 months.
Did their age matter? Like if they got to 18, could they leave?
Okay, so that's my next sentence. According to one student, the majority of students just aged out and signed themselves out when they turned 18.
Wow.
Some kids apparently did stay past their 18th birthday, which one student felt was a true testament to the effectiveness of the brainwashing going on at Elan.
Well, that and like, what if you didn't know the date? I don't know. I just feel like they could control everything. Like,
But they don't tell you, yeah.
Who can prove that, like, they could just keep you? Be like, you're not 18 yet.
You just change your birth certificate.
Yeah.
I know.
I don't know. It's so scary.
It's literally kidnapping. And a lot of the staff at Elan were former residents who graduated the program and had no formal psychological or psychiatric training. Essentially, the prisoners were running the prison in every way, shape, and form. And Joseph Ritchie was generous to his employees. One resident turned staff member said Joseph bought him his house.
Oh.
Yeah. Houses, cars. I mean.
Why?
Just,
To like keep them there?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I can't remember if I see things that are not in my notes that I read.
I knew
but
it.
I can't remember if it was on Reddit or if it was in one of the documentaries, but they were like, you had these people who had gone through the school, graduated the program. They have no psychiatric training, and they're like driving up in a Mercedes Benz. They're like, how do you think that they're affording this?
Right.
I think it was one of those things where like you needed people to be like true believers of the program and to want to be there, because you don't want things reported.
That was my second thought. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that's what was happening.
Bribery.
So I want to pause here to talk about 2 relevant psychological studies that I think relate to the behavior at Elan, just based on the structure that they've put into place. And both of these studies have always fascinated me. And I think
they're the same two that I am thinking of.
Yes, and I think I've read them in like every sociology, psychology, like
watched
criminal
every documentary.
psychology class. Like they're just all over the place. So first we're going to talk about what's called Milgram's experiment. Beginning in August 1961, Stanley Milgram, a Yale University psychologist, began a series of social psychological experiments to measure the willingness of participants to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform acts conflicting with their personal conscience. That's a very long sentence. The sessions involved an experimenter who was in charge of the session, the teacher who was the volunteer who was made to believe that they were merely assisting in the experiment, but rather they were the subjects of the experiment, and then the learner who was an actor who pretended to be a volunteer as well. The teacher and learner were told that they were in an experiment to test learning and memory and to see what effect punishment had on a subject's ability to memorize content. The learner would be strapped to what appeared to be an electric chair, and the experimenter would don a white lab coat. The learners were given word pairs to memorize, and if they got the answer wrong, the teacher was asked to administer a shock from 15 volts, marked slight shock, to 450 volts, marked danger, severe shock. The teacher could not see the learner, but could hear the shocks and protests coming from the learner when they were administered. If at any time the teacher indicated a desire to halt the experiment, the experimenter was instructed to give specific verbal prods to keep it going. And they came in this order: please continue or please go on. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. And then finally, you have no other choice. You must go on.
It's like giving me chills.
I know. Ugh. If the teacher insisted after the 4th prod, the experiment was halted. Otherwise, the experiment continued until the teacher had administered 450 volts 3 times. The experimenter also had prods to use if the teacher made specific comments. If the teacher asked whether the learner might suffer permanent physical harm, the experimenter replied, "Although the shocks may be painful, there is no permanent tissue damage, so please go on." If the teacher said that the learner clearly wants to stop, the experimenter replied, "Whether the learner likes it or not, you must go on until he has learned all the word pairs correctly, so please go on." Prior to the experiment, the majority of people polled felt that only a small fraction of the 40 teachers would administer the highest voltage. After the experiment, unexpectedly, they found that every participant was willing to shock up to 300 volts, and 65% were willing to go up to the full 450 volts.
I didn't know the stats obviously off the top of my head, but we'll have to link to like a YouTube video of it or something, because it is crazy to watch. Like,
they're like screaming,
and they have the actor being like, I think, and one of them like, "My heart," or something. Like, they're like,
please,
yeah,
yes.
It's so crazy to watch, and you can see the distress on the teacher.
Yes.
And you just think to yourself, like, you're like, I would never do that, but you absolutely would.
Yeah.
Most people would.
They were sweating. Yeah, they were sweating.
Oh, it's
their palms.
so crazy.
Because you're also a rule follower. So you're part of this experiment. You're asking these questions. You're told you have to go on. Like, you just think that you have to do this. So Milgram summarized the experiment in his 1974 article, The Perils of Obedience, writing, "The legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous importance, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives against hurting others, and with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. Ordinary people simply doing their jobs and without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. Moreover, even when the destructive effects of their work become patently clear and they are asked to carry out actions incompatible with fundamental standards of morality, relatively few people have the resources needed to resist authority."
Which is so scary.
I know.
So scary. We're not going fully down this path, but like a lot of that is what happened with the Holocaust.
Oh, I know.
Like,
that's always what I think of, where but that was also a problem. So that did work for some people.
The Holocaust was a problem?
Stop it. Some of the lower level officers would say, like, I was following commands, like I was in distress, like I thought it was me or them, like I did, like I couldn't turn them down. But then you also had higher ranking officers and they were like, you developed this. Like, they had to find other ways to prove, because the psychology behind this is
crazy.
so true.
So crazy.
But I think like the results of this parallels well to these therapeutic communities, because even when uncomfortable, these strength students being told by higher ups that they have to do these things and implement these procedures and, perform these punishments that we're going to get into for the sake of learning and healing, like they have to go along with it.
And there's a reason in Milgram's experiment that they had the experimenter put the white coat on, because things like that make it seem more legitimate.
So they're more
like
authoritative.
You said, the fact that it's in a school, the fact that it costs a lot of money to go, and then it's like all this formal stuff lends credibility to it. So you have either the students that are now working there or people that are hired there, and they're like, yeah, this is legit, and that they look at it as authority, and they're saying, oh, well, they must have figured out this program. Just like in Milgram's experiment, they're like, oh, well, they're like, if I were in it, I'd be like, well, they wouldn't kill anyone in an experiment, right? So,
you think,
so you
like,
think you're protected,
right?
So I bet you, not having read all of the results of Milgram's experiment, I bet that's part of it, is like the assumption that like the authority has the knowledge that you don't, and like there are safety and parameters. I still managed to hit that thing.
Yes, you did.
That there are safety and parameters because of the authority. This is so fascinating.
But I think too, when you were talking about that, I'm thinking of like Joseph Ritchie being so generous to his employees and buying them these things and having his name be on the house, that commands authority over these people. like demands respect. So if he's saying this is how it has to be to help these people, like this is how you help them, like even the people who might have thought it was wrong are still like, well, he knows what he's talking about, or I have to do it, I'm being told. Like it's just what, like the structure of it is just mind-blowing. Wow. The other experiment I want to mention is the Stanford prison experiment. Conducted 10 years after Milgram's experiment, Philip Zimbardo set up a psychological experiment in which he sought to simulate a prison environment for 2 weeks to examine the effects of situational variables on the participants' behavior. 24 men were selected, and they were predominantly white, middle-class men who were psychologically stable and otherwise healthy. So they were all baseline. All 24 of these men were like basically the same. On a random basis, 12 men were assigned to be inmates and 12 men were assigned to be guards. Only 9 were active in the experiment at a time, with 3 on standby in each group. A fake prison was set up with cells, and the guards were given uniforms in Stanford's psychology department. They even brought in consultants to make sure the environment was authentic. They basically took the doors off of these like classrooms and put in bars, and like they really set the whole thing up.
I knew that it had bars and all that, but I didn't realize it was in the school.
Yes, yep, in their psychology department. The prisoners didn't know when they were going to be arrested, and they were taken by surprise one day and brought to the, quote, Stanford County Jail. They were stripped, searched, and deloused, just like those at Elan School. The prisoners were given ID numbers and were called only by that number as a way to dehumanize them. And they were given those like skin caps in lieu of shaving their heads.
Wow.
So they didn't want to do that to them. The guards were not given any specific training and were told just to do whatever was reasonably necessary to maintain order and command the respect of the inmates. This could also be its own case, but I'm just going to keep it relatively short for now. There's like books and movies on it.
And it's so fascinating.
It's very fascinating. Guards were allowed to abuse their power to humiliate the inmates, and they did. They had the prisoners count off at all hours of the day and night. They had them do push-ups arbitrarily. They restricted access to the bathrooms and forced them to relieve themselves in buckets in their cells.
Isn't it fascinating that they came up with themselves the things that we saw with Cameron Hooker, the things that we saw, like that they came up with all those things that dehumanize and break people.
Yeah. It's just in you. It's like inherent.
Wow.
On just day 2, some prisoners staged a rebellion. They had like put the mattresses up against the doors. So the guards used fire extinguishers to like blind them and get in and get them out. And so those were considered the bad prisoners. So then they started mixing the bad prisoners with the good prisoners, trying to create distrust among the inmates, making the good inmates think the bad ones were informants and vice versa.
Similar also to the schools.
This is on day 2.
I was going to not interrupt, but I interrupted anyway. But that's what's nuts to me about this. The entire experiment was only supposed to be 2 weeks.
Yes.
But all this craziness happens immediately.
I know.
Immediately.
Yeah. One inmate began exhibiting signs of emotional disturbance after just 36 hours. And they were like, this guy must be faking it. They're like, basically, get your shit together. There were rumors of a mass plot to escape that never came to fruition. But the 2-week study was ended after just 6 days as the guards became increasingly sadistic and the prisoners became depressed and showed signs of extreme stress.
So, and I'm sure they all have literal PTSD after this and had to go and to have therapy. And
it was, again, I didn't write this down, but there was like right when I think it was like around when the experiment ended. Like, first of all, they said they noticed that at night the guards would be more sadistic when they thought that like the study wasn't going on and when they thought that people weren't watching. And then I think the guy, Philip Zimbardo, said he like called it off, at least for one guy. He came into a room and there was an inmate that was like crying hysterically in the middle of the room. And all of the other inmates were like chanting this inmate's number and saying that he was bad. And the guy was like, okay. He was like, you are not an inmate. I am I'm a teacher. I'm a professor. Like, we're leaving now. And the kid was like, oh, we're leaving now. And like snapped out of it. But within 6 days, average citizens put into this situation just completely devolved.
With such little prompts. It like required such little. It reminds me of, I was a big Mythbusters fan when it was on, and they did one about waterboarding. And that, I realize these are different things, but
Right.
it made me think of how quickly they did it. And it was like she had, I think it was Carrie that was the one that had the, that actually was being waterboarded. And she had, like, she obviously knew she was in a trusted place. She had a way to get out of it. And it was so fast that she panicked.
Oh,
and
yeah.
she talked about that. That just made me think of, like, how even though that was fake, it was not. And same thing with this, it was fake, but it wasn't. They were actually abusing them.
Right. It's like that power dynamic. Same thing with the Colleen Stan when one of the prosecutors and the other people, when they put that head box in, even in a courtroom surrounded by other people who are just going to take it off in a second, like that sensory deprivation, like that, like you're losing that power, you just lose it.
I had another thought when you were talking about how quickly all this happened and how they kind of figured out they had the bad prisoners and the good and all that. I was thinking about how fascinating it is that humans create society and have rules and everything in wherever they are and in whatever circumstances. They all of these are like their own little societies.
Right.
And these are really bad societies, but it's just, this is so fascinating to me.
I should have been a sociologist or a psychologist.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's so good.
It's so good. Yeah.
It's insane. Like I said, that could be
Unfathomable.
It's unfathomable and interesting.
And interesting.
It could be its own case, but I just wanted to give a quick snippet.
Yeah.
But I think seeing that power dynamic and how it can impact people, and how two people who were similarly situated, when you know, you randomly pick a role, it doesn't matter, they assimilate right into it. And that's what I was thinking.
Exactly.
Like when you come in as a student and then you become a staff member, you just assimilate to the role that you're in. Crazy. So within the structure of students seeking to assert power over one another to move up the ranks came the treatment piece of it, which contained aggressive tactics and humiliation. Students entering the program were told that you get to leave when you change. Despite being a school for teenagers, education was considered a right. And for those who earned it, they would have school. It was from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. No homework, no tests, no projects.
Okay.
The other 12 hours of the day consisted of constant conditioning and brainwashing. And your level of schooling had no impact on where you were in the program. Students could complete their senior year twice if needed before graduating the program.
So absolutely no motivation to take advantage of whatever education they were given.
It had nothing to do with education.
Yep.
No schooling was going on, really. And you had to learn to change in the school and adapt quickly to try to limit the attention being directed at you, like the attention of a general meeting is what it was called. If someone did something wrong, someone would call a general meeting, at which point the wrongdoer would have to stand up against a wall facing a house of 50 to 150 kids, and they would just be verbally berated and torn to shreds in front of everyone. And general meetings could be called for the most benign behavior. For example, one woman was crying on her first day there and wanted to leave. They called a general meeting and yelled things at her like, "You're a piece of shit that tore your family apart. Your parents don't want you. You're a manipulative bitch."
I'm speechless as usual, but I was thinking, like, is it so awful? Could you realize how ridiculous it is and just almost like ignore it? And then I was thinking, absolutely not. Of course you couldn't. And it just
especially when you're emotionally vulnerable like that, like you're getting a general meeting called because you're having like a mental breakdown that you're there and were abandoned. And then other students, so it wasn't just the student that called you out that could berate you. Other students were allowed to, they called it express their feelings toward the wrongdoer. And they were all allowed to yell whatever they wanted, and they could yell and spit and just, berate them.
God.
In addition to general meetings, they had encounter groups where students would express their feelings towards other residents. They got to like put in a little slip, and then they would get to have an encounter with this person. So residents could scream and swear at each other for anything, including like using someone else's shampoo. If you didn't participate in the encounter groups intensely enough, you'd get in trouble. And then after the shouting, they would discuss their emotions and try to resolve them. This one could have a place in society if done correctly.
Okay. If done correctly is a very important disclaimer.
It is. But you know, a lot of times we all like suppress our feelings, and then we don't talk about things, and then they just fester, and then somebody explodes. But this is like in a controlled setting. You're like, you know what? Fuck you for using my shampoo. And then you're like, let's discuss.
That would be fine. This is like a suggestion box gone wrong.
Yes, yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like just employed correctly.
Yes.
But probably not great.
No.
Not not in this setting.
Well, that's like I was trying to say originally, like the idea of having a more intense AA, like the point and the intent of it is okay, but the application is a problem.
Right. And also AA is about like support, growing, healing. That's not, support is not really what's going on here. No. They also had therapy sessions where they tried to evoke primal feelings, and they had what was called scream therapy. They would discuss their feelings and try to identify deep-seated issues that they would then have to repeat until they were screaming and crying, saying things like, "Why did you leave me?" or "I'm lonely and it hurts me."
I think any physical and emotional like strain like that has such an impact, regardless of what it is you're saying or whether you believe it or not. It like creates something in you. I think like I think it was probably quite profound in a bad way.
Okay, and it has to be said, I did my best. I did my best.
I don't know what you're referencing.
Dane Cook.
I mean, I know Dane Cook, yes.
Oh my gosh.
Go on.
When he's like, when you're crying and you're just ugly crying and you like look at yourself ugly crying and you just like, you cling to a phrase and you're like, I did my best. I did my best. And when you're crying in the car, you're like, everyone can see me. I did my best. Wow. I'm kind of embarrassed to be friends with you right in this moment.
Is the embarrassment coming towards me though? Is it, or is it maybe going the other direction?
Maybe I'm projecting.
Do you want to talk about it?
No, I don't have any primal feelings about it. Anyone who tried to run away from Elan would be brought back and tormented.
Of course. Yeah.
One kid was brought back and he had to wear a rabbit costume and leg shackles.
Oh.
When anyone ran away, they would send higher students out to track them down, and most people didn't get far. One student escaped and never returned.
Oh.
Dawn Marie Birnbaum was a rebellious teen who was sent to Elan by her mother. She ran away from the school on March 12th, 1993, and 3 days later, on March 24th, her body was found in a rest area in Pennsylvania.
No.
With yellow rope wrapped around her neck and hands, and she was naked from the waist down. So let me just digress and tell you about this murder real quick.
Oh my God. What are the fucking odds?
I know.
Get put in the Elan School and then you manage to escape and then you're murdered? Like I thought you were going to say she committed suicide.
Oh no.
Which would have been tragic enough. Mm-hmm. But she was murdered?
Mm-hmm. Yes, she
Come
was.
on.
I know.
Come on.
I know. Let me tell you about it.
Tell me about it.
Okay. An autopsy confirmed that Dawn had been raped and strangled. During the autopsy, the medical examiner found 2 black hairs that did not belong to Dawn. They also found evidence of tracks consistent with a semi or large truck leading away from where Dawn's body was found. Investigators realized that Dawn's death was similar to the deaths of 10 other women found in truck stops near or around the Ohio interstate. The common links between them was strangulation, sexual assault, and missing underwear or clothes. Because Dawn had crossed state lines before her or after her death, because the Elan School's in Maine, the police called in the FBI. Investigators put in thousands of hours of work looking into the tire treads taken from Dawn's crime scene and comparing them to the trucks from various trucking corporations. Oof. They ended up tracking the treads to a trucking business in New Waterford, Ohio. Upon questioning the company representatives, the police learned the concerned semi-truck was regularly driven by an employee named James Jim Robert Cruz Jr. Investigators obtained a warrant for Jim's semi-truck where they found a long blonde hair on the passenger seat that was matched to Dawn. After they determined the hair strand matched, Jim was forced to submit to a blood test to compare his DNA to the evidence collected during Dawn's autopsy. The crime lab determined that the semen was a 660 million to 1 match. Those are odds. Jim was arrested from his employer's corporate office near the Ohio-Pennsylvania border on September 8th, 1983, 5 months after the murder. He was charged with murder in the first, second, and third degree, kidnapping, rape, involuntary deviant sexual intercourse, robbery, and theft by unlawful taking. Witnesses at trial testified to seeing someone that looked like Jim in the area that Dawn was killed. They also testified to Jim doctoring his travel logs and lying during police interviews that he had never met Dawn.
Oh, man.
A jury convicted him of first-degree murder, but acquitted him of the other charges. He was sentenced to life without parole. The task force was never able to pin the other murders on Jim, but the murders along the northeastern Ohio highways mysteriously stopped once Jim was incarcerated.
So she leaves this abusive school and comes across a fucking serial killer.
Mm-hmm. I know.
That's so tragic.
I know.
And unfair.
I know. I
don't like it.
I know. I'm sorry.
Wow.
It's really bad luck.
I was so optimistic. I'm just really mad because I was so optimistic when you said one person escaped and didn't go back. And I was like, yes. And you were introducing her. I was like, tell me about her life. And then you laid this shit on me.
I know. I'm so sorry. Jim Cruz Jr. got to her.
What the fuck?
I know. It was the inception of cases.
Seriously, you love to do those.
I do. Jim appealed his case, but he's still in jail.
Oh, yeah. I guess that wasn't, I guess it was a while ago, but.
Yeah. Well, no, the appeal, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court declined to review the appeal in February 2023.
Oh.
So it took a hot minute.
Fairly recent.
For all those appeals.
Well, I learned about all of that in the Velma trial.
Yes. So it couldn't help but include it. Sorry.
Naturally.
Sorry. Okay, back to the soul-eating hellhole, as one student described it.
You just continue with that.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to make a joke asking about the number of pages the denial was.
Oh, I'm unaware. I did not include that. You psycho. In addition to the therapy sessions, Elan was big on humiliation. Residents had to wear signs bluntly admitting their failures, and they had to wear it around their necks and announce it to the rooms when they would walk in.
This would be like, as someone who is a perfectionist and doesn't like to be wrong, this would be like exposure therapy for me. Like admitting anything I've done wrong would be exposure therapy.
I think you admit it, but like behind closed doors. I don't think that you would like announce it.
No, you would think that, but
okay.
Ask my husband. I don't admit I'm wrong.
As someone who is a perfectionist with insane anxiety about my perfectionism, this would ruin me.
Yes,
would ruin me.
Yes.
Michael Skakel was forced to wear a sign around his neck that said, "Confront me about the murder of Martha Moxley," for 6 weeks. And he was also the subject of a general meeting in which the students tried to get him to confess to the murder.
Did you tell us that in that? I think you did.
I did, but I don't think it had quite as much meaning as it does now that we've talked about it more in depth.
Wow.
That's why I brought it back.
Thank you.
Elan also used costumes to humiliate. If someone acted childish, they would have to wear a big diaper and carry a rattle. One woman had syphilis and she had to wear a crown of tampons around her head.
What?
I'm hoping that they were clean, but in the documentary they had red on them. I don't know. I don't know. It was like an actress.
We'll hope it's dramatized.
Maybe it's paint. Maybe it's paint. Michael Skakel was forced to wear a chicken suit and admit he was a coward. Students were also encouraged to journal and cop to their own guilt. One woman held hands with someone for 5 seconds when the light went out, and she admitted to that behavior. She got a sign that said, "Ask me why I'm a whore," and she also got a general meeting about that behavior.
Oh my God. And you're between a rock and a hard place, because obviously I'm like, why would you admit that? But you have to admit, like, you can't not admit things. They're just going to make you lose.
Right. And
like,
what if someone found out about it and you didn't admit to it?
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And they also had, I don't know how this didn't make it in my notes, but they also had things called haircuts, where if you had an indiscretion, you would be brought into a room with like other students, probably
not the shingles.
I'm thinking exhibitors, but that's not the word.
Expediters.
Expediters, thank you. With the expediters, and they would just like scream at you about like what a piece of shit you were.
You know, so there's obvious trauma that comes with this, but then the depth of things, like, even what if you like couldn't get your hair cut anymore? You know, once you're out of school, I mean, like, the depth of the trauma that this place has created for people.
Well, it wasn't a real haircut. It was called a haircut. But maybe you couldn't even be near the word haircut.
I was stuck on being proud of myself for thinking of the word expediter, but I think I just netted that back down to 0. Damn.
It was just a phrase, haircut.
I get it.
Okay. Elan wasn't just about psychological abuse.
Just imagining these poor people sitting in a barber chair with they're just like, I can't do it. Okay.
You're like, you could identify all of the Elan survivors by their long locks and unkempt beards.
Oh, God. That's fucking hysterical.
Anyway. There was physical abuse as well at Elan. One of their tools was corporal punishment.
Oof.
Residents would be spanked with a ping pong paddle or a clipboard, and it was the students who were responsible for paddling the wrongdoers. They'd have to line up behind someone who was bent over a chair and be part of this punishment. They also used isolation to try to force compliance. If you acted out or broke the rules, you could be punished with the corner, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You stand in the corner until you couldn't stand anymore. You would then have to sit in the corner. Some people would be in the corner for months.
What?
Months. You'd begin wall staring at 7 a.m. and you would stay there until your dirty floor mattress was brought in at about midnight, and you would rinse and repeat.
Months?
Months. The most insane punishment at Elan was called the ring, which we know would have ruined me. The ring was described as a last resort therapeutic tool, an exercise in futility to prove that violence will get you nowhere. You went into the ring if you exhibited any violent behavior. There would be 10 to 15 students forming a ring around another student who was the bully, and then the house champion would enter basically to kick the bully's ass.
Oh my God.
The system was designed that the violent person would never, ever win. Because even if you won a few rounds, they would sub out the person you beat and send in as many new people as needed to defeat the offender.
So it's like survival mode on like a zombie game.
Yes.
You just literally can't win. You just play till you die.
Correct. And it was to show that violence was an exercise in futility.
And I'm guessing I'm sure they had ways if you tried to just like let them beat you so that you could be done with it. I'm sure they wouldn't let them.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And other students said that the ring, however, was not limited to violent students. They said one student ended up in the ring for simply not responding to prompts while they were in the corner. Can you imagine being like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm like catatonic right now. So instead, like, put me in the ring and make me get my ass kicked.
Oh my God.
Michael Skakel spent time in the ring when he was there.
Oh, really?
Again, trying to get him to confess to murder. He was put in the ring and had his nose broken at one point, and then that was when he finally submitted and said he didn't know if he did it or not. This all goes back to when they said that, they're like, he basically confessed to it at this boarding school.
Oh,
did he?
God.
Like when you hear about the boarding school, like, did he confess or was it like literally tortured out of him?
Wow. Because I do remember you telling us that part, but wow. And I think we did come to that conclusion even without knowing all the details of the school.
Like the coercion.
Yeah, but that's insane. I feel like somebody is required to read all of that before they can make the assessment on Michael. So,
right.
Yeah.
I know. Elan came into the spotlight during Michael Skakel's trial in 2002. Prior investigations had been done by the state and found no danger to students or wrongdoing. Whenever Maine investigated Elan, they never found any issues. An op-ed caught the attention of higher-ups in New York State who wanted to investigate because kids were being sent from all over these local states.
Yeah.
The first time New York investigated Elan after that op-ed was written about the school, they found the issues we know about. Students restraining other students, sleep deprivation, attack therapy.
And everything is blatant abuse.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's not anything that it's like, oh, it kind of looks okay and it's hard to prove. No, this is blatant abuse.
We're like attack therapy. You could be like, this might cause long-term issues, but like,
no, they're physically beating people.
Someone over a chair and paddling them with a ping pong paddle. That's pretty clear. So the reason that Maine had never found anything was that Maine always announced when they were going to review the facility. New York went in unannounced.
Heck yes.
Dramatic page turn. Elan only closed because the internet hit its wallet. It was never closed for breaking laws or violating regulations.
After all of that?
After all of that. There was a student that began writing about Elan about 10 years after he got out. Once Reddit got a hold of it, it spread like a virus and attendance slowly dwindled. It closed on April 1st, 2011, and the school's owner at that time said that she blamed declining enrollment and resulting financial difficulties, as well as the negative attacks on the school on the internet, which again really started on Reddit.
Wow.
And I remember some of the Reddit threads I was reading, there is like this original post from this guy, and a lot of the comments were like, I was reading this and I was like, yeah, okay, this is fucking made up. They're like, and then I started looking into the school and these other schools and it's like, holy shit. Like it's all like the
Wow.
reports that have come out from the people, and it's so consistent across the board.
And it's really hard because you have like, until you gather enough people giving these reports, you're just like, oh, of course you said you hated it because you have a grudge against the place or whatever.
You're being manipulative.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And what's the other piece that's like fucked up and interesting is
The other name for our podcast.
fucked up but interesting. Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
Alternative name. The people, they're asked about it, and some people were like, well, I think it impacted me. You know, they're like, I don't know where I would have been without it. Other people, like another guy was like, well, you caught me on rock bottom, and I'm like, just did a bunch of drugs before I sat down here. Like it was varying degrees of, you know,
answers or
not, I don't know. It's not that I think that it probably did help some people, like I said, but a certain type of person.
Well, I love analogies. Here's the analogy. Torture occasionally can get the truth out, but it also gets not the truth out. And you never know the difference, and it's all bad. Like,
right.
That doesn't mean torture's okay.
Right.
You know, it's the same thing here. Like, yeah, for the two people that needed something to that extreme, that's not the case for the majority of the people. And in fact, you've done far more damage than good.
Right.
By law. It's the same on a lighter note. It's the same as like people who are like, oh, well, I'm not going to wear a seatbelt in the car because one time one person wore their seatbelt and it killed it because they wore their seatbelt. It killed them. Right. 9,000. I was gonna try to make it a really big number and really ruined it. 9 times out of 10, it's fine. You know. So anyway, I'm done with my analogies.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I was just taking a sip of wine.
You know, we did say in the beginning we were going to mention that we just, like, when we started the podcast, we used to have a glass of wine every time, and it was great. And then somebody went ahead and got pregnant and couldn't have wine, and then we kind of didn't, and now Marina's having some.
It might also contribute to our review about wet mouth noises. So I think we tried to slow down on drinking while we were
It's so good,
recording.
though.
It is delicious. So I'm not saying that the school is like a success if it helped like 2 people out of like 200. No. I'm sure across the board it caused more harm than good. But it's just interesting for some people to be like, I was headed down a bad path and like I would do anything to avoid going back to that place. Yeah. So, you know.
Yep.
So this is really just the Elan School, but this was one of many groups of institutions that are part of what's called the troubled teen industry, still exists.
Which is terrifying.
Their practices border on child abuse and neglect. Several states have since enacted regulations to increase oversight over these facilities, but there's no federal legislation. And without consistent legislation, there are inconsistent results coming out of it. So facilities that are accused of mistreating children or are being closed in one state can just relocate and rebrand in
That's like in the
state.
program, right? That's what happened. And you know, they always say follow the money. It's funding something. It's channeling money somewhere.
It is very lucrative business.
Yep. Because if it had nothing to do with money and it were just about child abuse, I'm pretty sure they'd be shut down and there'd be laws. But there's something
somewhere.
Yeah, there has to. That's what always happens, you know.
Right.
So that's awful.
Yeah, and like, how can the legislation not pass?
Right. That's what I mean.
Right.
Right.
So
wow.
This could have been 87 parts if I did. I know Paris Hilton went to one of these. She brought a lot of attention to the issue.
You could always do another part another time, like, because it's not, you know, you're not leaving anyone on a cliffhanger.
Right.
So
there was a book that I didn't get to read. I think it was called something like Children in the Darkness. And I was like, oof, that sounds like I want to read it.
Yes.
It sounds.
Yes. What did we say? Fucked up and interesting.
Fucked up but interesting. Yes, it does. So as always, we just want to say how much we love you. And we want to thank you for your love and support and for being our Patreons and for sticking with us when we're like off the fucking rails and cuckoo bananas. But we love you so much.
We love you.
And listen, learn, and stay alive until next time, because the future is fucked up but grim.